Greetings, YouTube. In the second edition campaign that I ran, the one that I mentioned in my I don't have a prayer video I did recently, I decided that I needed a location that was the threat that all prisoners dreaded. So I created the Isle of the Dead. Now, at first, it sounds like your classic haunted island, or a threat. We'll send you to the Isle of Dead. It's worse than death, kind of thing. And that's how it's used in many places, as a threat. It really is a place that prisoners are sent to die. But it was more than that, and I used it in the campaign fairly deeply over a fairly good length of time. And what I did is that I was setting this in Faerun, and the nation of Cormyr is where the main campaign took place. And in Cormyr, at least in my Cormyr, necromancy was completely legal. It was just considered another branch of magic. It is what you did with that branch of magic that mattered. If you did evil things, then you would be arrested or killed or what have you. And if you did neutral and good things, you would be ignored by the law. So it wasn't considered any better or worse than any other school of magic. And because of this, one of the NPCs in the group was one of my ex-wife's, was playing a male half-elf, and this character's girlfriend was a necromancer. She had a skeletal cat as a familiar. Creeped the heck out of the other party members. And because of this, they all had a kind of interest in the undead and necromancy in general, because they had fairly regular contact with a necromancer. And eventually, the party came to realize that they needed contact with a lich. And I pronounce it lich. If you want to pronounce it go ahead. I pronounce it lich. So they began to do a little research about the most famous lich in the world, and that was the Lich-King, who controlled the Isle of the Dead. Now, if you look at a map of Faerun, there's a country, or a little area called Telen, T-E-L-E-N. And just south of that are two islands. They're almost exactly east-west of each other, and there's a little separation. They have no name, no numbers, or nothing on them. Well, in my campaign, I made them one big island, so it was a larger area, probably about the size of Madagascar, a little bit smaller. And this was the location of the Academy of Necromancy that the Lich-King had created. It was also where he had his plantation set up. Yes, he was a farmer. Some 2,400 years prior to the campaign time period, he had gone to this island, and at that time it was basically controlled by a bunch of rabble, all kind of thinking of themselves as nobility, and like 2 or 3 generations prior to that, they'd all been pirates. So, it was not what you'd call really well organized. They weren't really using the island all that well. Mostly it was a haven for pirates and privateers and things like that, and the occasional slavers and things, and they had stopped to get supplies and such at this place. And the Lich showed up. He was from another prime material plane, and liked what he saw, had a bunch of money, paid the guy in charge at the time, and said, I'd like that rocky point of land at the other end of the island that no one wants, because it was inhospitable, there was no harbors, there was nowhere to land a boat, it was basically useless to anyone who was a pirate or anyone on the island. So the guy in charge said, yeah, sure, have fun. And he went there, built a tower, and everyone pretty much ignored him. Well, over time, he began to buy up land. Didn't have to be anywhere in particular, but if you needed money, he had it, and he would take your property. He would also buy bodies, no questions asked, from anyone who brought them to him. He also passed out gentle repose spells on scrolls, and those are the scroll spells that you cast on a body. It basically stops it from decomposing. It's an embalming magic 101. And he passed them out like candy. So if you brought him a body that had been this spell cast on it, he'd pay you for the body, he'd give you another scroll, and send you on your way. So this way he started constantly having a supply of bodies coming in, and all of them in relatively decent condition. So over time, and it took him almost 1,500 years, he gradually began to buy up the entire island. At the point where he had 75% of the island under his control, he basically told the rest of the pirates that were still there, and the scallywags who thought they were still nobility, and at this point they actually considered themselves nobility, he said, well, I'm in charge now, and I have an army of zombies behind me. You don't get to argue. You've got 2 choices. You stay here under my rule, or if you want to leave, I'll give you 1,000 silvers and a ticket to any port in the world. Lots of people took him up on the offer. Some didn't. He kept the main port functioning, walled off most of the island, and turned a quarter of the island into his plantations and built his academy there. The rest of the island was left to go fallow, completely and utterly. It was just left to the wild. He wanted to create plantations to make a lot of money, but he didn't want to flood the market with so much food that it devalued what he was selling. So he had a control of how much exports they made. Now, as a ruler, he was very nice. Low taxes. Everyone that lived there as a resident got free produce. So you had low taxes, free food, and he was a just ruler. He was essentially neutral. His rule was that as long as you're alive, your body is inviolate. Someone maims you, rapes you, or kills you, that person is going to end up becoming a zombie. Probably while they're still alive, they're not going to enjoy it. And all of his plantations were run by zombies. Workforce never complains, never stops working, 24/7, doesn't need any food or any kind of a support. Once they're made, they keep doing what they're told. No one could figure out how the Lich-King was able to control as many zombies as he had, but that was his particular secret. He had a large academy, mostly necromancy. He dabbled in transmutation magic, and whenever he had an experiment that didn't quite look the way he wanted or didn't quite work the way he thought it should, he would chuck it over the wall into the wild section of the island. So lots of that section of the island was populated with really nasty things. It kept interlopers out. If you wanted to get into that wild section, he'd let you. For a small fee, he would give you a license. You could then go in there. Most people went there for hunting, gathering spell components, or just trophies, things like that. Occasionally, they went out there looking for something that might have been in existence long before he took control of the island. Ruins and things like that. There were cities in there that had just been left to rot in the jungle. And this is how he made his money. And he made lots of it. And he became very powerful. And he became the breadbasket for a number of countries bordering his little island. And he had lots of power, lots of zombies, skeletons, things like that. And he understood that people didn't necessarily like the way zombies look. So he had every one of his zombies sealed in leather. The normal zombies had black masks, just eye holes, nothing else. So you couldn't see with their body in the least. It was just a brown leather body and then a black mask. Then there were zombies that had red masks. Those were the Juju zombies, the zombies that had been created while they were still alive. Not nice, but he would take in people who were going to be executed anyway. He'd buy them off of the states that wanted to get rid of them, so they got rid of people that were going to execute anyway. They didn't have to execute them, and they made a profit. Kings loved this. Rulers thought it was awesome. And then there were ones that had white masks. They were the volunteers, the ones that worshipped the Lich-King as a god and wanted to be as close to him as possible. He gave them a measure of immortality. They weren't true liches, but they were a heck of a lot more than zombies as well. And they were the overlords, the bossmen, the straw dogs, the people that kept everything functioning on the island. He attracted undead. The place was crawling with them. But so long as they didn't violate any of the rules, he didn't care. He frowned upon slavery, just simply because, he felt that was really bridging the whole your body is inviolate while you live. And the one ironclad rule he had is when you die, he gets your form. And since most of the people coming through this place lived fast, died young, and didn't care about their corpse, this didn't bother them either. So, this is what he created, this Isle of the Dead. A location where you could come to learn about transmutation, necromancy. A place where you could find treasure and adventure all in this one location. And then there was a Lich-King himself. A mystery, enigmatic, immortal, and very lawful and very neutral. He ruled his land very even-handedly. It was very good for business, and people loved it. It also attracted a lot of people that had nowhere else to go. Heretics, rebels that failed in their jobs, nobles that had to run from their home nations because they were going to be executed or assassinated and they needed someplace to come. You could come here. Of course, you ran the risk of being preyed upon by ghouls or vampires, quite possibly. they were willing to bridge the whole don't kill people thing because it was, what they do. And the Lich King had forces that fought them. So you had this undead Lich King hiring adventurers to make sure that the streets were not being preyed upon by vampires and ghouls, who, if as long as they didn't break the law, were allowed to come and go as they pleased. All in all, it was a very dynamic, very interesting location. And I actually ran one major adventure there in the party. Mostly it was a background location, but we did have one adventure on the island, which I will explain in a separate video, because this one's running long. But that's what I had. I had the Lich King in the Isle of the Dead in Faerun, that I always thought was one of my more colorful locations and a place that I really enjoyed using, and I enjoyed just contemplating the complexities and the power that one Lich could have if you just take your time and are patient.